Hey everybody, welcome to this format, First Christian Church. Kind of welcome to the Brian Gorman First Christian Church recording basement place. So, just so glad that you're joining us in this particular way, in this particular format. Our goal today is the same goal it is every day, and that is to help meet people where they are and move them closer to Jesus. And if you're at home, because everybody's supposed to be at home, then that's our goal here today, is just to help kind of meet you where you are. I know a lot of you over the last few weeks have been sending me pictures. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. You've been sending me pictures of you and your family. And so I know for some of you, not only just you and your family, but for a few of you, you've been going to the homes of some people that you know that don't have internet access or maybe struggle sometimes with the computers, to be able to show them this and participate in it with them. Thank you so much, both for doing that and for sending us pictures. A lot of you sitting there in your PJs. That's fantastic. Not a problem. Jesus still loves you there too. So let me kind of share with you a few things that are going on. First thing I'd encourage you to do before we get into today is, if you haven't done it yet, I'm encouraging you, like in a normal church service, one of the things we do is we'd say, hey, I'm going to give you 40 seconds to stand up and say hi to people around, but we can't really shake hands right now. A little, internet high five, I guess we can do that. What you can do, what I'd recommend you do, what I'm challenging you to do is, hey, when you're done with this today, that at some point today, just pick up your phone and call 3 people that you haven't talked to the last few weeks, right? Just give them a call, see how they're doing. This has been one of those times that's proven to us how much we value being together. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is go over to the church's Facebook page and just say hi on there. Let us know that you're there. Or go to the YouTube link. If you're at YouTube on a link there, add a comment in there, just who you are that you're watching. If you're not from the Kenosha area, let us know where you're watching from. That just means so much to sort of help us all be together in this time. Something else that's available is, I want you to know, if you haven't gone to KenoshaFCC.com yet, there's some great things on there at KenoshaFCC.com. You're going to be able to find some resources for your kids, for students. So I want you to be aware of that. The other thing that's up on KenoshaFCC.com that's new is, if you go to KenoshaFCC.com/contact/prayer, that if there's anything going in your life that you'd like people to join you in prayer with, right? That's the place to go do that. Add that in. There's been some amazing, wonderful things that have been happening in people's lives throughout the last few weeks. We want to be able to celebrate that. And we also know that for some of you, it's been a very challenging time, either some time of loss and pain when it comes to family, jobs, just financial concerns. We want to be a part of that with you too. We just want to join you in prayer with that. I encourage you, go to KenoshaFCC.com/contact/prayer so we can do that. Now, for today, let's get everybody on the same page. We started last week into this passage in Zephaniah, and I've shared quite a bit. Like, people have asked a few times, like, why in the world would you cover a book like that? Right? Zephaniah is this, it's a challenging book because of how much it deals with God's wrath. Like, it uses that word over and over. A day of wrath is coming. And so what do we do with that, with a day of wrath? And a few people have even said, Brian, this is like, are you sure this is the right time to cover that kind of book? And what I said last week, and I stand by it, is that we have set up this series like 4 and 5 months ago, and I'm just trusting in God's providence that it is valuable for people to be able to take in. I think that there's a lot of things within this passage and within this book that are worth us looking at. So Zephaniah chapter 2, last week we were in chapter 1. If you didn't see it, I'd encourage you to go back, check that out first. So Zephaniah chapter 2. I'm going to read the whole chapter. We'll read the whole chapter, and then we're going to go back and tear into a piece of it. But I want you to see the whole chapter in context before we dive into one piece. So Zephaniah chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, reads like this. Gather together. Gather yourselves together, you shameful nation, before the decree takes effect. And that day passes like windblown chaff, before the Lord's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath comes upon you. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land. You who do what he commands, seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. Gaza will be abandoned, and Ashkelon will left in ruins. At midday, Ashdod will be emptied and Ekron uprooted. Woe to you who live by the sea, you Kerethite people. The word of the Lord is against you, Canaan, land of the Philistines. He says, I will destroy you, and none will be left. The land by the sea will become pastures, having wells for shepherds and pens for flocks. That land will belong to the remnant of the people of Judah. There they will find pasture. In the evening they'll lie down in the houses of Ashkelon. That's a tough word to say. The Lord, their God, will care for them. He will restore their fortunes. I've heard the insults of Moab and the taunts of the Ammonites who insulted my people and made threats against their land. Therefore, as surely as I live, declares the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, surely Moab will become like Sodom, the Ammonites like Gomorrah, a place of weeds and salt pits, a wasteland forever. The remnant of my people will plunder them. The survivors of my nation will inherit their land. This is what they will get in return for their pride, for insulting and mocking the people of the Lord Almighty. The Lord will be awesome to them when he when he destroys all the gods of the earth. Distant nations will bow down to him, all of them in their own lands. You Cushites, too, will be slain by my sword. I don't know. I just love that that's like the simple, like, oh yeah, and you guys too. And he just kind of goes on. All right, so he says this. It says in verse 13, he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, leaving Nineveh utterly desolate and dry as the desert. Flocks and herds will lie down there, creatures of every kind. The desert owl and the screech owl will roost on her columns. Their hooting will echo through the windows. Rubble will fill the doorways. Beams of cedar will be exposed. This is the city of revelry that lived in safety. She said to herself, I am the one, and there is none besides me. What a ruin she has become, a lair for wild beasts. All who pass by her scoff and shake their fists. Wow. That's a lot. So I'll tell you what, here's what we're going to do is I'm going to pray, and then we're going to jump into this. All right? So let's pray. Father, I thank you for the technology that we get to be together and apart all at the same time. I thank you for the people who are listening and processing this information. Just help me be, just be proper with your word. Help me to handle it well, to convey your truth above mine, and allow what it is you want the people to hear to permeate beyond the words that I use. And we ask you for these things as ambassadors for your son, Jesus. Amen. We've been doing this for weeks now here at the church, for years here at the church, is that we put this number up on the screen, and what I'm doing is I'm encouraging you to text into that number. I've got the iPad that information comes to, and those are completely anonymous. Like all I see is a little bit of small information. I don't see your name or anything come in there. So I'm encouraging you over the course of the day, as we're talking about something, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to text in a question. What I've been trying to do is over the last week, and I'll be doing it again this week on Facebook, trying to answer some of those questions over the course of the week. So let's start by understanding what's taking place here. That Zephaniah starts out talking to Judah. He's talking to God's chosen people there in Judah. Now, he then goes on. He's like warning them, and then he goes on and he starts naming all these other places. He starts naming the Philistines, and he starts naming the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Cushites. Cush is also Ethiopia, by the way, if you want some context as to what that is. And Assyria, and he starts going through this. Let me give you context as to what he's saying here, because I think it helps to make sense that when you see who he's really talking about, that by the time that we read this, that you have the kingdom of Judah, kind of that pink area there in the middle. I think it's pink. I don't know. Is it light purple, lavender? I don't know. I'm going pink. So there's the pink area there. And what he's saying when he starts laying out these different communities, when he starts talking about the Philistines, right? He's saying that's one side of you. That when he starts talking about the Moabites and the Ammonites, that's the other side, right? So we've got both sides. Now, when he starts talking about Cush, Ethiopia, he's also talking about Egypt. And Egypt is all of where it says the Arabu tribes and the kingdom of Edom. That's all the southern area, right? So you got your southern taken care of, your eastern taken care of, your western taken care of. And then on this map, you see the kingdom of Israel. And you see right above that sort of that seafoam green. I'm getting really caught up in my colors tonight. Seafoam green. The seafoam green is actually the nation of Assyria. One of the main cities of Assyria is Nineveh. That's what he's referring to here. And at this point in history, when Zephaniah is saying this, that little seafoam green section owns a huge chunk of it. They have already taken over what is written as the kingdom of Israel there. So this is important to see that what he's saying is, look, I'm talking to Judah, but what I'm talking about is going to impact everywhere around them. The other thing he's trying to say to them is that when you hear problems are coming, right, when these statements are made about what God is going to do, what some people would naturally think is, I'm going to run to a different country. I'm just going to go hide, right? But what he's telling them instead is that there's nowhere to hide. That if you go north, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. That this is going to affect everybody by the time it's said and done. And it is. We're going to cover some more of that actually this week on Facebook if you want to join me on there. But that's what he's saying is there's no place to hide. So instead, to really understand the context of who he's talking to, because he's really talking to Judah. There's other places in the Bible where he explains more of what's going on for the Moabites and the Philistines and the Egypt and Ethiopians and the Assyrians. There's other places where it dives into that, but in this particular passage, that's not who he's dealing with. In this particular passage, God is specifically dealing with his people. And so, if you're a follower of Jesus, it makes sense to us that we would look at it from a bit of a personal perspective. Like, what is he trying to say to his people? So I want to go back and really dive into verses 1, 2, and 3, because I think if we can understand 1, 2, and 3, there's so much happening there. So let's look back at verse 1 again. It says this. It says, gather together, gather yourselves together, you shameful nation. Gather yourselves together, you shameful nation. Now, when he says gather in this particular passage, he's not referring to the idea of like huddle up and circle the wagons, right? That's not the scenario. It's not a statement of huddle in fear. The statement gather is, hey, can we all get on the same page? Can we all be focused together for a moment about what's going on? It's a sense of how in the midst of crisis do we all have the same conversation, the same heart, the same mind? Even if we kind of disagree with one another. Right? I tell you, the last few weeks have been, I believe, very insightful for how, I don't know, I want to be really cautious here, right? I keep trying to tell people, look, I'm not saying that God caused this or that God didn't cause this. I wasn't in the meeting and I wasn't consulted when we're talking about the coronavirus and what's going on. If you're watching this way in the future, that may not even be something that means much. But for our people right here, right now, today, like this is a big deal. But what we've seen is that it's been a real challenge to get everybody on the same page. It's been a challenge to get everybody on the same page. And so it's been interesting to see that. Now, I understand sometimes how people react to it differently. That makes sense to me because some people really just have struggled with the idea of their freedom of movement being taken away. Some people are just deeply concerned financially. All of those things are legitimate. All those things are deep fears and concerns. But what we've also seen is that there's whole groups of people who are handling it differently than that. So, for example, I just know for myself that I've carried like a great deal of frustration and anger over a lot of it, especially in the first few weeks. for a number of reasons, a lot of other reasons, right? But even in the midst of my frustration and anger and anxiety and I don't know what other words you'd want to put in there, still felt it was in the best interest to comply. Even if I didn't understand or didn't agree, it's still good to comply in order to keep people safe, right? Just talk about getting everybody on the same page. Like just this week, there's a young adult down in Kentucky. I read about this and I heard about it, and then I looked it up and wanted to read into a little bit more, that a group of young adults in Kentucky got together for a coronavirus party. Threw a big party for that to happen, and one of the guys at the coronavirus party ended up getting diagnosed with the coronavirus and is actually in a hospital there as of 3 days. Let's see, when you're what, a few days ago, right? Like we all hear about it, but it's been a struggle to get everybody on the same page, and that's over something we're all in agreement with, that at least it exists. You take a group of people who don't even believe God exists and try to talk to them about God wanting all of his people to gather together, man, that's a tremendous challenge right there. That's a tremendous issue. But that's what he's saying, is Zephaniah is speaking to the king and speaking to the leaders to say, guys, if we can all gather together, if we can get on the same page for a moment, that if we can do that, what a difference that would make. Catch this again. He says, gather together, gather yourselves together. And here's what he says as to the why part of it. He says, gather yourselves together before the decree takes effect and that day passes like windblown chaff. Before. Now, a lot of times when we read this today, we are reading it way after the fact. Right? So much of what God is talking about has already happened. And so on occasion, when we read about God's swift judgment and movement and actions against Israel, we sometimes mistake it as, look at how angry God is. But what we miss is that when these things were spoken, it was well in advance of anything happening. That God is giving them this as a warning. Now, when he speaks to some of the other nations, he makes some promises to them. But to the people there in Judah, he's giving them a warning, saying, before I have to do this. Right? Isn't that like good disciplinary action? I don't care if you're talking about like a boss at work or a parent. Like before you have to discipline someone, before you have to, drop the hammer, love, concern for that person, warns them first, sometimes multiple times, sometimes too many times. But it warns and it warns and it warns to say this is coming. See, what you have to understand is that this statement from God about what he's going to do is not a statement of wrath. It's not. It's a statement that comes from love. It's a statement that comes from love. Because God sees the direction that this nation is going. He sees this direction, as he says in Zephaniah 1, a nation of deceit and a nation of fraud and a nation of violence. He sees this and he's like, I've got to do something, because the path that they're on is so dangerous. The path they're on is focusing on other gods and other situations and they need to get their attention back on me, the one who put the world together to work the right way. And when they function in the way that I designed the world to work, life will just go better. Like the society will function once again. And so he sits there and tries to tell them, like, before this happens, because he says, let's show it to you again. He says that before that day passes like windblown chaff. Here's what he's saying, is that the days float by really fast. They do. For some of us over these last few days, like they move by so quick that you kind of forget which day it is. That it just, if it hadn't been for some of the stuff I've been doing on Facebook this week, I'm not so sure that I would have known the difference between Monday and Thursday, because some of the routine is just out. The routine with the kids is out. Like for some of us, we've struggled to kind of keep track of one day after the other. And what we know is that days just float by. How often have we looked at friends and said, oh man, we've got to get together. Man, someday soon we got to get together. And like 4 months later, we're like, oh yeah, we were going to do something. Man, I've had that happen just here recently. There's a friend of mine. I've been trying to. We've every time we see each other, like this is going to happen, and we've put it on the calendar. I think 3 times now, but 3 times something has happened because the days just go by so quickly, and we forget. So what he says is, hey, before this day of the Lord, this day of discipline shows up and it becomes a past tense, like, don't let the days just keep rolling by. Grab a hold of them. I mean, just over the last few weeks, I think some of us have seen the value of grabbing a hold of the days, of just really making the days matter again. The time being able to work, the time to be able to help the kids. For those of you who are doing some stuff at home with the kids, the times to be able for the kids to find activities and things to do. And after the first few days, it's time to kind of really gather around and sort of focus on what's important, right? That is exceptionally valuable. One of the things that God has said, okay, I'm going to tell you, I put this in my notes, and I'm a little leery of sharing it with you. I'll tell you that much of it, but I worry that because I have a camera that I'm more inclined to not tell you, but if I was in front of you live, I'd keep going. So I'm going to keep going. One of the things that God tells his people over and over and over throughout the Bible is to remember Sabbaths. Now, some people have tried to take that and said, well, look, Jesus kind of abolishes the Sabbath and does away with that. Yeah, I hear what you're saying in that. I do. I understand where that comes from. But I also know that multiple times that God holds the Sabbath, a day of focusing on him, a day of slowing down, a day of not being overly worked, is exceptionally important to him. One of the things that's kind of interesting to me is the difference between the way that we view a day and the historical Jewish people view it a day. So we view a day as basically when we wake up, sun up, right? When your alarm goes off. But the ancient Jews didn't see the day that way. In the Bible, the way a day is set out usually starts at sundown, because when the sun goes down, that day has now ended, right? That actually makes sense. But that also means that you start your day with rest. That you start your day with rest. This is part of the ancient Jewish way of understanding how God wants us to work. That you start your day with rest so you're ready for what's next. And I mean, I'm speaking for me here, right? And I know I'm not alone in this. There are a lot of us who have forgotten how to rest well because our schedules are so busy, right? It's almost like a badge of honor to show that you're busy, busy, busy everywhere you go. And all of a sudden, for some of us, that's been taken away. Now, I'm still really busy. I know a lot of you are still really busy, but it's a different busy. Like, it's not getting in the car and driving from place to place to place to place to place. It's a different busy. God has called us to have days of Sabbaths. And again, I'm not saying God caused or didn't cause. I'm just saying it's interesting to me that a God who is asking his people to rest and trust him, when they stop doing it and our schedules become so crazy packed and our technology becomes so focused on keeping us always busy with another ringing in our ears and another dinging on the computer and another activity that we've got to be at, then in the midst of it, God goes, we're going to pause. Again, I'm cautious on that idea as to whether it was God or not. I'm not trying to say it was. I'm just saying that I think that this can be a real gift from him. See, this is why the next thing that he says here is, he says, do all this before the Lord's fierce anger comes upon you, before the day of the Lord's wrath comes upon you. And then he goes on, and here's where I think it gets really fascinating. Because when he goes on, he says, seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, you who do what he commands. And he goes on. See, let me kind of look at this for just a second. Seek the Lord, all you humble the land, you who do what he commands. See, the key word here, the key word I want you to see is the word seek. Seek the Lord. You're going to find this is going to show up a few more times. It's a big deal. Seek the Lord. God is not expecting his people to get it all right every time. What he's expecting his people to do is seek him. Look for him. Now, there's this word play that goes throughout the whole book of Zephaniah. It's all over the place. And it's the word hides. It's variations and different words meaning hides. So I'm going to show it to you in a moment because it's going to come up in a minute. But Zephaniah, his name means Yahweh who hides. Right? His name references things that are hidden. Things that are, his specific name doesn't mean hidden as in you can't see it. It means hidden as in this is mine and you can't have it. Right? That's very much how Zephaniah is laid out in this sense. It's a sense of sheltering, a sense of protecting, a sense of hoarding, a sense of clinging to. Because what Zephaniah's name means in a lot of ways is that God holds on to his people. And then throughout the book, you find these statements about God is hiding, sort of, but it's a play on words here. When he says seek the Lord, he's saying God's really bad at playing hide and seek. Right? It's not hard to find him. Right? So we actually did this with the kids this week. I thought it was a really neat idea. I looked at my older daughter and I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to find me like 3 options of something to do with the family this evening. And so what she did is I gave her the computer and she starts searching up different ideas online. And she finds this game called Scavenger Hunt. So here was the idea of it, is that everybody in the family gets a turn. And what they did is she found this little bitty monkey that kind of looked like a giraffe. It's hard to describe. She found this toy, and it really was just like, it was about that big. I don't know what size that is on your screen. I'm just saying. It was, yeah. So what we do is that one person takes this thing, and we gave them a minute to go anywhere in the house to hide this monkey giraffe thing. And so at that point, once they get it, they come back and tell everybody else, all right, it's hidden. And then the whole family just scatters throughout the house trying to find this thing. And then everybody in the family gets one turn to hide it. And whoever has found it the most times wins a prize at the end of the night. That was kind of the idea of it. It really was a fun evening, right? Just a really entertaining, fun time. But, I mean, this figurine was small. And we got a lot of places where this thing could hide. We had to start making more and more rules, like, okay, not in this room and not in that room. But you try to take a toy and hide it in a toy room, that can take you a while, right? So we had some things to go with that. What he's saying is God is not like that. God's not that hard to track down. Like God is being vocal about his presence. And God is saying, all I want you to do is notice me. I'm right here. That's what he's trying to draw his people back to, is to seek him. Right? This is really, really key. Now, the issue is that sometimes we're afraid to look for him for a couple of reasons. Sometimes we're afraid to look for him because we're embarrassed by who we are. Sometimes we're afraid to look for him because we just don't believe he exists to begin with. But one of the things that's so valuable here, let me show you this section again, is when he says, seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, who do what he commands. What he commands is that you look for him. He is fully aware that you're not going to get it all right. Right? We see this really strong in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4. I'll show you this one because I think it really stands out. Hebrews chapter 4, beginning in verse 14, says this. It says, therefore, since we have a great high priest who's ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we don't have a high priest who's unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. See, this day of wrath that he's talking about, man, that's a time of need. That's absolutely a time of need. And yet in the midst of it, God goes, all I want you to do is seek me, look for me. And God doesn't just stand there with this great sense of, I'm just waiting to punish you. In fact, he's saying, I'm right here. He wants us to experience his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness. But if we don't actually take him seriously, it's hard for us to experience that. What he says is, look, I know what you're going through. I can feel your pain with you. I'll join you in the pain and the frustration. I'll join you in the pain and the frustration of your own weaknesses, and I'll join you in the celebration when you get it right. But all I'm asking is you seek me. Stay in the relationship with me. You see, what most of us do when we're in the midst of crisis is we kind of go the other direction. We get very caught up in trying to solve the crisis. And what God says is, look, absolutely try to solve the crisis, but use it as a way to see me through it. Which is ultimately what we come to when he sort of finishes this idea out. He talks about the humble ones. He says at the end of verse 3, he says, seek righteousness. He doesn't always say you're going to find it. He says be looking for it, be working at it, and seek humility. Now, we've been talking about this idea for a while now, but there's certain ideas that have to go together for them to be whole. If you have righteousness, right living, you live your life in such a way that it's aligned with God's plans and God's setup, right, with God's will, like we talked about a few weeks ago, that if you live your life in that way, but you have no humility, then you begin to think that God owes you. And that's a very unhealthy place to be. You begin to feel like you got it all right. It's a dangerous place. There's a lot of passages in the Bible that deal with that. Jesus tells a lot of stories about that sort of thing. So he says, seek righteousness and seek humility. The two have to go hand in hand. Righteousness and humility have to go hand in hand. See, if they don't, then you have this challenge, right? Here's the way it works in the normal world. If you seek righteousness, the right way to do things, the moment problems show up, you move into like hyper-vigilant mode and you get very focused on making the right decisions the right way. You get very focused on actions, and you get very focused on trying to fix the problem. Right? Which is good. But the problem is, if you do it without humility, you go into it with arrogance. And arrogance tries to get credit for fixing the problem rather than just trying to fix the problem. Now, on the flip side of it, I know some people who go into problems with humility, and humility all by itself, if not focused on trying to do the right thing too, humility actually can turn into something negative when used improperly. Because improperly, humility gives up. Oh, I can't solve this problem anyway. This is too big for me. Yeah, I don't know what we're ever going to do with it. No. What he says is you need to seek the right way to do things with humility. Seek righteousness, seek humility. And he says when you do, perhaps. And I love that he's that honest about it, right? I love that he's that honest about it. Perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. Perhaps you will be sheltered on the day of the Lord's anger. That word sheltered there, that's a big word. Because that's the same word or similar word. That's another word for hides. It's another word for hides. It says God is out there and God's not hiding. But when you seek him out, the God who isn't hiding, that when you seek him out, and you seek out righteousness and you seek out humility, that when you do that, he will gather you back in and hide you. And hide you, so that in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the suffering, he's not promising that that's going to go away. He's not promising that you won't deal with it. He's saying perhaps, but he's not promising you won't deal with it. But what he is saying is, in the midst of it, that he will hold you and he will protect you. This is actually what Jesus lays out. Jesus says this at one point in Matthew 23. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to be crucified. He's kind of looking out at the city, and in the midst of it, this is what he says. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Notice what he's saying is, what I wanted to do was hide you under my wings and protect you. Hide you under my wings and protect you. See, this is this ongoing theme through here that he wants to do. And how does he do that? What is this righteousness that he longs us to have? This humility that he longs us to have? Ultimately, righteousness and humility is found when we trust Jesus. Because in Jesus, the one who is righteous died for those of us who are not righteous, so that we together may be righteous. How do you seek out righteousness? You seek out Jesus. You work more and more to know him. And why is humility so important there? Because it takes humility to recognize I can't fix this by myself. It takes humility to say, I need someone bigger, stronger, who knows more, the one who put all of this together. I'm going to follow his right ways, not my right ways. I'm going to follow his plan, not my plan. I'm going to trust in him, not me. That takes humility, righteousness and humility. And so in Zephaniah 2, God says, here's what's coming to the whole world. Here's what's coming to the whole world. And this is why he sent Jesus for the whole world, so that all may come to know him. My hope and prayer for you in this time when we are gathered together apart is that you spend some time seeking righteousness and seeking humility, seeking the Lord, seeking Jesus, trying to figure him out more. Man, I have loved to hear the stories of some of you lately who have been texting me about, man, I can't believe how much Bible I've been reading, how much Bible I've been listening to, right? When you're at home, just playing it in the background. That's been so encouraging. I love hearing that. How many of you have been kind of joining us in some of these studies this week? This is a great time for us to spend time focusing on him. And perhaps, if this is something that God has sent, perhaps if we gather together and focus on him, it will pass by. And perhaps we will, if this wasn't some big thing from him, perhaps when he sends one in the future, if we continue to remain faithful and continue to that, perhaps he will shelter us and keep that from hitting as well. And at the end of the day, what we know is that one day when God's judgment for the whole world does come, for those who have sought out righteousness and humility that is found in Jesus, that we will be fully and permanently protected by him so that we can live forever with him. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray for us, and then I've got a few quick things at the end that I think are really important. You really want to know. So let me pray real quick, and then we'll move into some next steps here. Father, we thank you so much for your love and your mercy and your grace. Our hope and our desire is that you help us to seek you. Our hope and our desire is you. Let us be a people of righteousness and humility. Not just humility without action, and not just action without humility. Let us be a people of righteousness and humility who seek out you, knowing the only way that we put all that together is firmly and solely in Jesus. And help us to gather together, to be of one mind, to be of one heart, and to help more people come to know you, who will hide and protect us in the midst of chaos, who will give us peace and grant us an understanding that is beyond our own. And we ask you for these things as ambassadors for your son, Jesus. Amen. Few quick things. First of all, one thing I want to encourage you to do, if you're watching this on YouTube, hopefully you're watching this on a playlist, and as soon as this ends, it'll jump right to some worship songs that have been put together that fall into this conversation. I'm encouraging you, man, check that out. Sing along with your family. Those have been I've personally really gained a lot from those over the last few weeks. I encourage you to do that. Also, over the course of the week, you may have seen this past week on over at KenoshaFCC.com, you may have seen through there that there's been a Spotify playlist that's available. If you go to the resources page, there's a Spotify playlist of just some worship music to kind of help you have going in the background throughout the week. That's been really, really great. I encourage you to take part in that. Let me see here. For those of you that have been wanting to give, best way to do it is KenoshaFCC.com /give. Or some of you have been asking this week, a few of you reached out and said, how do we do it if we don't feel comfortable with the online thing? That's great. Just mail the check to the church's address. That's 13022 Wilmot Road. But I encourage you to do that. And then the other thing I want you to encourage you to do is this, that again, go online, check out other resources at KenoshaFCC.com for the kids and for students, but also every day at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the evening, I've been online last week. I'm going to do it again this week on Facebook, doing a Facebook Live at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the evening, to dive deeper into some of these passages. There's so much more to unpack here in Zephaniah. We spent about 30 minutes together just sort of keeping up with what's been going on in each other's lives and diving into the Bible a little bit more. So I encourage you to join me for that. Again, give some phone calls this week. Call some people. Say hi to them. See how they're doing. Reach out to them. And then don't feel bad. I'm encouraging you strongly. Jump over to KenoshaFCC.com and share your prayers with us, things that are going on that we can join you with. All right. We love you and cannot wait to actually gather back together once more. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.